Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this kind invitation and the brilliant introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. It is not hard to do this talk on various fronts. First of all, it's always very difficult to do a talk right after an amazing performance. I know the expectations are quite high at the moment, so I try to satisfy some of them. Second, it's really difficult to give a talk to an audience who's coming from various different disciplinary backgrounds. Although AI is a very hot topic and extremely popular these days, considering the various backgrounds of people here, I wasn't really sure what to talk about. So I tried to pull together a talk that can, I'm hoping, some information relevant to at least some of you. And you will be able to get some insight out of it. My particular background is in engineering, but I did my PhD in Masters and Masters in Learning Sciences, so I've been looking at applied AI in education throughout my career. Great. Let me try to start by giving a basic information about the AI improving performance. As you're all be familiar, AI has been increasing in its performance in recent years. And a colleague of mine, Keynote AI in Education Center in Stanford, has been publishing these AI index reports every year. The most recent version, a couple of weeks ago, has been released. And there are really interesting insights in this report every year. And this year, one of the most striking ones was indeed the fact that AI performance continues compared to various benchmarks that have been used to measure AI performance. I looked at the graph that they have put in their report, looking essentially at the performance of recent AI models in comparison to a human baseline. And one of the really interesting insights here is that you can see in most of the benchmarks, recent AI models are actually outperforming humans. It's really interesting because a lot of the benchmarks are not really only traditional benchmarks like computer vision or image classification, but they also have benchmarks like the incredible science question answering, and you can see that the recent models are outperforming humans on PhD level science questions. Obviously, these kind of impressive developments have significant implications for education. I find it very fascinating and exciting in certain senses, but I also find it quite scary because every single time we advance in AI in a way that it does something that we thought to be uniquely human, we lose a part of ourselves because we are letting an AI model to take charge of this particular task that we used to thought as a uniquely human task. This kind of reminds me of the thought experiments of Democritus. Democritus was making these thought experiments about matter, and he was saying that you can think about matter and cut it in half, and cut it in half, and cut it in half, and at some point you will reach a point that you cannot cut the matter anymore. And he called this point the indivisible atoms. The concept of today's scientific concept of atom actually comes from these thought experiments initially. So when I think about these kind of ideas and look at the performance of AI overtaking various tasks of humans, the core question that I wonder about, and I think we should all be asking ourselves, is what is the power of a human that we cannot cut away in? Where do we draw the boundary of an AI development to say that this area is actually a net human area and we should not be automating any of these tasks in this particular region? To a certain extent, this is quite a philosophical question, and I really enjoyed the first, one of the first talks where the brain of a head, brain of a heart, and the brain of a gut were discussed. It's an interesting proposition because to some of my colleagues, when I look at these kind of questions and ask them, the answer is nothing. because for them, human body might actually be considered as a Turing machine and we can potentially automate all of these processes. But when I ask the same question to my colleagues who are coming more from social sciences and humanities, then their responses tend to be quite different. It's a philosophical question, but the question also has various implications that are quite pragmatic with regards to the future of education. Because the answers that we would be giving to this question also are associated with the answers that we would be giving to the question of what we should be educating people about. And also, what should the role of an AI system be in education? In my own research, I have been conceptualizing AI deployment in education in three categorizations driven by the extended cognition theory. Particularly looking at AI as an opportunity to externalize human cognition to replace particular human tasks. Thinking about AI or computational models as opportunities to be presented back to humans for humans to internalize these computational models to change their own representation of code, this internationalization. Analyzing conceptualization. And the third conceptualization, which is the use of AI as an opportunity to expand human cognition as part of a technical human AI synergistic systems. Now, within the third conceptualization, I want to highlight a couple of points. One of them is that these systems should be synergistic in the sense that the emergent intelligence should be larger than the sum of agents' intelligence. Therefore, you would expect a change in humans or a change in AI itself. And in education, we actually have a particular direction of change that is expected from these interactions. Because if the emergent intelligence is synergistic and the human intelligence change is towards a negative direction, that's not necessarily a bright future for education. So we want the change in humans to happen towards a particular direction, which is an increase through amplification of their own cognition. If you try to map these three conceptualizations on Ben Schneiderman's two coordinates of human control versus automation through AI, consider the most traditional educational technologies as low automation and low human control systems. And if you look at the first conceptualization, then these would be the human tasks automated with highly automatable AI systems in which there is limited human agency in the system. It looks like when we look at the practice of these conceptualizations, currently, unfortunately, most of the AI in education implementations are utilizing AI for human task replacement rather than other two conceptualizations. I put here one a recent study from the Department for Education in the UK by the government, looking at over 700 stakeholders trying to understand across the UK how AI is used by practitioners in education. And you can see there is nothing surprising here. Most of these activities are associated with finding activity ideas, creating practice questions, mock exams, generating materials for particular age groups, are essentially all human task replacement implementations. Of course, we are scientists, and we are very rarely impressed by this kind of survey studies where the static information is provided by practitioners. So I wanted to also show you an example from a recent report that is published by Anthropic AI, which is one of the major AI companies across the globe. And they looked at 4 million conversations of people with their cloud AI model. And they were looking at what kind of professions, to what extent are using AI in their particular context. And they identified a few really interesting insights. One of them is that they found that approximately 4% of the professions are actually using AI for over 75% of their everyday professional tasks. And that is quite an optimistic measure because most of the reports that are coming from the estimations with regards to how many percentage of the professions will be automated have actually significantly higher percentages proposed. So it looks like only 4% of the professions are actually heavily using AI for automating particular tasks. Do you have any guess what might be these professions are? Let's shout out some names because I can see that 50% of the audience is sleeping, so I would like to encourage a little bit more interactivity. Yeah, you can shout, please. Hey, say it again. Wow, that is a really interesting shot, and it's not really the one that comes up first, but yes, interesting the teachers were in this particular category, to my surprise as well. When I ask this question, usually the professions that people are shouting are software engineers, lawyers, or people who are essentially using most of their thoughts to generate content. But teachers were not really coming to people's minds. But very interestingly, teachers are actually one of these professions that were identified to be using AI for almost 25% of their tasks. I would like to highlight here that this is a particular subject-specific teacher, a language teacher, so they did not necessarily generalize these findings into all teachers. But to me, it's a very interesting finding, and a little bit worrying that teachers are using AI for the majority of their tasks. In the report, they also highlight what percentage of the interactions can be categorized as automating human tasks versus what percentage of the activities can be categorized as augmenting human capabilities. And they are optimistically reporting about 57% of these interactions, the formula interactions, to be augmentative, and about 43% to be automating particular tasks. But if you look at the specific labels that they can use to make these distinctions, actually you can see that it's quite broad, in the sense that, for instance, they are categorizing every single time a person asks a question to the model, can you explain gravity to me? They were labeling these as augmentative behaviors, but we all know from the learning sciences that such questions are very unlikely to lead to effective or deep learning for humans. And I would probably categorize these as automatic questions as well. For me, the most interesting part is this 2.8% category of the 4 million conversations, where the humans were creating particular drafts and some ideas and then putting this into the AI, and iteratively asking AI to help them develop their own ideas, and then these could potentially be labeled as augmentation interactions. Of course, these kind of interactions are not necessarily limited to text media. The various other media have also been used in terms of improving efficiency and effectiveness in education. One of the really popular ones are AI-generated synthetic videos. In my own lab, we have been investigating the potential of AI-generated synthetic media for various learning games and learner experiences. So we have done multiple experiments of professors recording their own lectures, putting them on the Moodle or other LMSs, versus the same content being delivered with an AI-generated synthetic media as part of the same pedagogy where the direct interaction was taken. Do you have any guesses? How many people think that me recording my videos on Moodle versus the same content that I want to deliver is delivered with AI compared in terms of learning gains? How many people think that the human videos will achieve higher learning gains? Can I see some hands? Okay, no one is interacting, that's great. How many people think that it would be AI-generated synthetic media achieving higher learning gains? 1, 2, okay. Is it my accent? It's probably my accent, right? I have a thick accent, and when I ask this question to my students, they are usually saying that AI-generated synthetic media will do better because you have an accent, which is fair enough. These models do not have an accent. It's really interesting because we have been doing these multiple experiments with 50 students, 100 students, and 500 students. And in all of our studies, we have shown that in terms of learning gains on recall, so open-ended questions, and learning gains on recognition, we found no statistically significant difference in terms of the students' learning gains. We also found no statistically significant difference in terms of the learner experiences at the affected level. Actually, these videos are not so good that most of the students were not even able to realize whether it was a real video or if it was an AI-generated synthetic media. And we are using a UCS tipping of company like Google DeepMind, another UCS spin-off company. We are using Synthesia to generate these videos. If you are interested in using similar approaches, I would strongly advise you or suggest you to have a look at their products that are extremely realistic. Another really interesting implementation space is to use generative AI for helping educators and lecturers and professors with regards to their feedback practices. If you ask most of the teachers how do you spend most of your time, they will tell you that I spend most of my time doing marking and generating feedback. So that's a really important area to focus with regards to the use of AI to support lecturers and teachers. So at UCI we have been running various experiments on this. For each student assignment question and the student response, in this particular experiment we were generating 3 different feedbacks: AI-generated feedback, human lecturer-generated feedback versus the human and lecturer working together, which is the cooperative feedback. And then we were asking students about their reflections and evaluations of these 3 different types of feedback. And each one of these, afterwards, we were revealing the original source of the feedback, whether it was AI-generated, human-generated, or cooperative, and asking students if they would like to revise or change any of their evaluations of the quality of these feedback. I would like to put here a couple of results from these experiments, which I think are quite interesting. Well, first of all, it's quite clear that we can still see a strong bias against AI. So if the students do not really know the original source of feedback, they tend to judge the credibility of AI-generated feedback quite low compared to the human-generated or cooperative feedback. So this strong bias does exist. But students are really struggling to be able to identify the original source of feedback. So here you can see the success rates of students to be able to detect the original source of feedback. And you can see that they are about 20% to 60%, which highlights that the quality of these AI-generated feedback is so good that most students are actually not even able to tell whether it is AI-generated or human-generated feedback. We found some statistically significant correlation between the students' years of experience of using AI versus their ability to detect the original source of feedback, but they were still quite low in terms of the average success rate. Perhaps more interestingly, when we look at the quality evaluation of this feedback with regard to genuineness, objectivity, and usefulness, the AI-generated and cooperative feedback were statistically significantly higher than the human-generated feedback. To me, that's really interesting because when we started interviewing the lecturers and the teaching assistants to be able to identify why students might actually be preferring the AI-generated feedback, it has become quite clear that those people were under too much pressure to generate certain amount of feedback under such short amount of time that they were actually not able to spend enough amount of effort into the creation of good quality feedback. And it was also very interesting to see when we revealed the original source of feedback, it was only the genuineness dimension that was then changed by students that was dropped, but the other 2 dimensions of the feedback quality with regards to objectivity and usefulness were kept repeated. To me, I think it goes now without saying that AI can indeed provide significant productivity gains. And all of these results that I just presented indicate towards this direction that you can save time with the use of AI in education. But qualitative improvements with regards to the work that is being produced by teachers actually require significant scaffolding skill from experts to the human users in order to be able to observe any potential changes in the quality of practice. And this is yet to be evidenced at a scale. Now you might say that, okay, that's great, you have been only showing the experiments from your own lab. Yes, I was mainly highlighting the studies from my own lab that I'm directing, but I also would like to highlight that similar results are emerging across the globe from different labs as well as independent randomized controlled trials. So I looked here at ICT that has been implemented in the UK with 68 representative schools, and their results essentially showing that teachers who use AI save about 31% of their preparation time, but there was no statistically significance with regards to the quality of the material that the teachers are generating with the help of AI. Now, you might say that, okay, it's great, Professor. Even if only we are using AI to save time, that is good enough argument to use generative AI in education. And I would agree with this because we could do many other things with the amount of time we are saving from teachers. But I would like to highlight a couple of challenges that still exist in the field that we should be bearing in mind and think about what are we potentially losing by only using AI for the efficiency gains. And one of the significant challenges I think is associated with the fact that these models are indeed performance-wise improving, but the fundamental problems about their hallucination and their reliability and sensitivity issues have not been resolved. And I'm not pretty sure if we will be able to resolve these problems using the same transformer architectures unless we have a paradigm shift in the way that we train these large language models. And one of the really interesting points to highlight here is also the fact that all of these benchmark studies that we have been looking at are benchmarking issues that are more appropriate for NLP developments, but there is no specific benchmark when it comes to the particular pedagogical quality of AI-generated content. Another really important issue is associated with the fact that these models have still various biases embedded in them. Of course, you can think about biases in so many different terms. One of the obviously very significant ones are explicit gender biases. And if you have explicit gender bias in these models, you can easily patch the model with certain approaches. But if you have implicit biases embedded in these models, then it's a very difficult problem to be addressed. I put here one of these examples of the implicit biases that are very difficult to be addressed computationally. So here you can see that teachers who are using a large language model and asking large language model to generate a reference letter for their students. And if the same model is asked to generate a reference letter for a male student, it tends to use very different adjectives than the same model where it is asked to generate a reference letter for a female student. You can see that for the female students, the model uses these adjectives of communication skills, being very easy to communicate with others, or their ability to be liked a lot by the other members. But when for the male students, the same model uses those leadership skills of scientific rigor or well-rounded personality. So these kind of biases that currently exist within the society and in our languages are by default embedded in these large language models, and whenever they are used in educational practice, they do create and reflect. So we have to be very careful not to exacerbate these biases by the use of generative AI. Another really significant issue from my point of view with the researcher in this area is the fact that most people still are relying upon commercial AI tools in their educational practice. And commercial AI tools have significant problems associated with cost and licensing fees, privacy and data security, control and customization, and the very big issues that are associated with the sustainability and environmental impact of training these large language models. So in my lab, we have been focusing on the potential of using relatively small language models that we have been training in our own hardware within the UCI facilities that are performance-wise on particular educational tasks like question generation comparable to commercial large language models, but can be run on mobile phones even in the low resource contexts. This line of work where academic research is leading small language model development that can be performance-wise comparable is extremely important, not to leave all of these AI generation activities to the hands of commercial stakeholders. Another issue is associated with the fact that these models can indeed be used for standardized education. Regardless of where the model is developed, every single model has various values that are embedded into the model based on the values of people who are training these models. So for instance, for the DeepSeek model that is based in China, there are certain issues that you can talk about, and there are certain other issues that you cannot talk about. If you ask the ChatGPT, for instance, to generate an image of a mother, the image that it would generate would be the mother of a very Western, value-driven image. Now, that is not necessarily bad or good. It's about recognizing the fact that there are certain values that drive these models, and to what extent these models and their values are aligned within our own culture and our own educational values should always be questioned. I am not really sure how much of this mother is representative of your mothers in Indonesia, but I know across the globe there are so many mothers who do not really look like this. So what values are driving these models will be the values that are driving our education systems if we move toward the direction where these models are replacing various teacher tasks, therefore various value decisions will be made by models instead of the teachers who might be representative of the local culture. There's also this issue about the teacher deprofessionalization, which is this idea that if you are letting generative models to do and replace particular teacher tasks, what are the long-term implications of this replacement on the teacher's professional capabilities? For instance, if you let an AI model to do all the formative feedback generation, what is the teacher's capability? What is the impact on the teacher's capability of generating feedback? I think should be a very bad question. Because when a teacher generates feedback, you do not only generate feedback, you need to understand the particular strengths and weaknesses of your students. And all of these are very much intertwined competencies and skills that should be approached with caution before we move towards an automated direction. There is also this issue of automating very poor practices in our education systems. In the UK, we do a lot of user studies in the educational context, and I always ask students and teachers, what do you want AI to do for you? You're a teacher, what do you want AI to do for you as a teacher? And the teachers are oftentimes telling us things like, you know what, I have so many essays to mark, and I want an AI to do the marking for me. Great. And then you go back to students, and then you ask them, well, what do you want AI to do for you as a student? And most of them, they complain about the fact that they have so much homework, they have so many assignments, so they are saying that I want an AI to do all of the essays for me, so I don't need to do all of the homework. So if you think about a user-centric design and development of AI, where you are trying to address all of these needs of the users, in a dystopian future, you might actually end up in a situation where students are using AI to generate particular assignment responses or essays. Teachers are using other AI to do the evaluations of these particular AI-generated essays. So AI is heavily used in education, but nobody actually learns. And nobody actually gathers the satisfaction of flourishing a particular person. This is a poor practice of education system that we give way too many homeworks, that we give too much work to teachers to do the marking, and automation should not address these kind of poor practices. Automation should aim for innovation in our education system. This, of course, requires a change in our education systems to move away from these whole outcome-driven assessment systems and towards more process evaluations. And at UCI, we have been practicing some of these process evaluations. For instance, in my own teaching, whenever I give an essay writing assignment to my students, instead of only looking at what they produce at the end, we actually ask them to write these essays on a digital environment, and we are looking at the interaction of how to generate this essay in order to be able to model with time series analysis of what kind of competencies do they actually develop as part of the essay writing process. I find it fascinating that although many of us are interested in process-driven competencies, very few of us are actually evaluating the processes of our students that lead to particular outcomes. I've been teaching at UCI for over 15 years now, and I'm yet to receive one particular essay then I look and I think, oh my God, this is a fascinating outcome. I should go and publish this particular outcome. Then it changed the world. The outputs have very little value to us as educators. We give these assignments because we expect teachers to develop and students to develop particular competencies through engaging with these assignments. So we should be looking at these kind of process evaluations rather than only focusing on output evaluations. At UCL, as I mentioned, we are using this process evaluation and mid-evaluation process. We send an email to the students saying that, look, based on your current level of interaction, you might actually be failing this particular essay. Do you need additional support for you to engage more effectively with your essay writing process? And these kind of emails have also been studied and shown in experiments to be a lot more effective than only looking at outcome evaluation. Now, so far I have been mainly talking about teacher-facing interactions, but this example actually reminds me and brings me back to the student-facing AI implementations. Now, we have mentioned that the teacher-facing AI can help people gain productivity and save time, but productivity gains are of secondary importance for students. For a student who have access to any kind of large language model these days, they can actually pass their courses and pass their exams effectively, and they can save a significant amount of time in their assignment preparations, but that doesn't mean that they will actually learn anything out of these interactions. I put here one evaluation from my colleagues at ICEHOS, which is one of the top EU institutes, that particularly is focusing on STEM subjects. And they have been looking at the performance of GPT-4 at ICEHOS, at the Prof. to be able to see what percentage of their exam questions can actually be answered accurately with GPT-4. And you can see here their results that actually over 80% of the exam questions could indeed be answered with GPT-4. So any student who has access to these models can pass all the exams and get an engineering degree from a top 10 EU institute. But what does it mean? That doesn't really mean anything in terms of their learning gains. We know that if we are giving students access to an AI, then this AI should actually take the pedagogical supporter role rather than giving answers to all of the questions of the students. We know a lot from existing learning sciences with regards to effective pedagogical implementations. So a core question to ask is, how do we embed these learning sciences principles into these large language models so that they behave more pedagogically meaningful manners? Because we know also from the previous literature, looking at the intelligent tutoring systems for the last 4 decades of literature, that if you use this adaptability in the intelligent tutoring systems, learning gains can indeed be achieved. We know these systems are comparable to one-to-group cohort human teaching, and might actually outperform a lot of these instructional approaches, both at the individual studies level, but also at the meta-studying level. Therefore, you see a lot of this commercial interest in this space as well. This is one example from OpenAI. I don't know if, how many of you have seen this particular video? No, that's great. We can spend 30 seconds to have a look at it. Let's have a look at how OpenAI is trying to embed learning sciences principles into their large language models, and that's the vision of the future of education from OpenAI, the ChatGPT point of view. Are you going to be able to listen to the video, or? I'm very grateful for the fact that I can present my slides, so I'm not going to expect sound. But considering the morning's technical challenges, maybe we can skip. Don't worry about it. Thank you very much. Here, essentially, you can see Sal Khan, who is the CEO of the Khan Academy in the United States, and they have been trying GPT-4 version where the How asks the model to behave like a tutor, and you can see the multimodal AI tutor actually can trace all the interaction of the student based on the screens and provide guidance to the student. The problem with this kind of large language model adaptivity interventions is the fact that these large language models are not performing very well with regards to their adaptivity, because at the huge scale of the high-dimensional vector space of the words, when you are preparing your prompts to be embedded into the model, most of the nuanced pedagogical guidance that you are trying to provide get lost. So this is a very recent evaluation of the adaptivity of GPT-4o, for instance, which is one of the most advanced large language models. And you can see that the adaptivity of GPT-4o is far inferior to more traditional intelligent tutoring systems, where you would be able to specifically build a learner model and a domain model and use more traditional AI techniques to be able to provide the adaptivity on key issues on feedback provision, hint provision, or content adaptivity. So this is all hypes that surround the large language models with regards to their adaptivity is only working to a certain extent at the very basic instruction level, but we are nowhere near to be able to provide detailed adaptivity that you would expect from an intelligent tutoring system with the help of these large language models. There are also significant issues that are associated with the fact that for the last 3 decades, we already knew how to build effective intelligent tutoring systems. You know, my colleagues from University have been building cognitive tutors for at least 3 decades, if not more. There are many examples like Duolingo. There are many examples that have been designed and developed to provide intelligent tutoring on subjects of science, subjects of maths, algebra. And we knew from the experimental evaluations that these technologies can indeed help students improve their learning gains. So a core question for all of us to think about is, if we knew that these models are already working, and if we already had evidence about their effectiveness, why the mainstream education has not really been utilizing these intelligent tutoring systems in practice? So there are, of course, various reasons behind this that are associated with the fact that, number one, a lot of these interventions are ecosystem level issues. You can build the best intelligent tutoring system with the most advanced AI in the world that can deliver the best pedagogy that you are aiming to provide. But if the enabling factors within the education ecosystem are not supported, those that are associated with the teacher's workload, those that are associated with the pedagogical culture of the school, those that are associated with the infrastructural and content-related issues, those that are associated with the infrastructural differences of the schools and the countries in which these tools are used, before these are addressed, none of these educational technologies, including the state-of-the-field AI technologies, will be able to make any kind of real-world impact. In our own work, for instance, working with over 800 teachers, a representative of the, well, how can I have 5 minutes? I was told, my talk last started 15 past 12. 5 minutes, I thought. Right, okay, I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you. Thanks for this intervention.
Because I thought we have a little Q&A after.
Oh, don't worry about it. Yes, I will do this. Thank you. These are significant ecosystem level issues that we need to take into account. Another really important issue is associated with the fact that if you look at the evaluation studies, you will see that the fidelity of these interventions are extremely low. And this is because if you are providing researchers to provide support to the teachers in the delivery of the AI intelligent tutoring system implementation, then they do achieve the expected learning outcomes. But when you leave the tools into the trusted hands of teachers, you will see that this effectiveness drops significantly. And the main reason behind this is that the teachers are lacking core competencies and they are lacking for confidence in order to be able to use these technologies effectively. I have been chairing a UNESCO AI and ICT in education working group with regards to the competency development, and we have been publishing 2 recent UNESCO reports on the AI competencies for teachers and students. I put here the UNESCO AI Competency Framework for Teachers, where you can see the 5 aspects and the 3 progression levels. This report is freely available, that you can download from the UNESCO website, and it has significant guidance on what competencies we should be improving in our teachers for them to be able to make the most out of AI technologies, both from the effectiveness point of view, but also from the ethics point of view. And at last, I would like to highlight that a lot of these technologies still require a significant amount of trust building among the stakeholders. Intelligent tutoring systems are only effective if the students are motivated to engage with these systems. But if you look at the literature, about 5% of an average student is able to motivate themselves and regulate their own learning to be able to engage with these systems long enough to be able to achieve statistically significant learning gains. And the role of a teacher then in the implementation of AI technologies becomes more of these people who are providing the motivation and guidance on effective interaction with the intelligent tutoring systems so that the students really indeed spend the required time with the AI technology. Let me finish with this particular slide where we have been talking about this particular vision of the use of AI where AI is used to provide intelligent tutoring systems. And it's really important when we are thinking about the future of education, not to fall into these illusional hyped future of education where a human being is interacting with a digital interface in order to be able to improve their learning gains. These intelligent tutoring systems can indeed be very effective, but the education serves a very different purpose within the society. It is an opportunity to protect certain values, to transfer culture, to flourish human beings with regard to their social and emotional competencies. We need to think about AI implementations that do not only focus on the content acquisition for improving the students' knowledge, but also provide guidance and improve human-to-human interaction. If we use AI technologies for teachers to save time in their practice, perhaps we could use this time for teachers to be able to spend more amount of time with their students and coach them to flourish as a human being. Let us not forget that the learning is much broader than knowledge acquisition, and education is much broader than learning. Thank you.